So we've made some significant steps forward on the AllegRo. Obviously we've got a different engine in here now. We obviously made the decision to go with the K20. I was pretty sure that's where we was going to go. The V6 was never going to work well. It's going to be too many compromises. I know there's a lot of people that would have loved to stick with the V6. I'm one of them. It would have been great to keep that engine in the car, but from an engineering perspective, it's not really oh, just put more effort in or come up with more solutions. The engine bay's physically not long enough. And then when you add in things like turbo manifolds, we would have to move that bulkhead back. And then when you move the bulkhead back, you kind of can't really use any of the original heater. A lot of dashboard gets changed. And we're getting into the unoriginality that Jonny doesn't want. He wants a car that is really, for the most part, the original AllegRo. So once we'd kind of decided that we were going to go for a different engine, that's when I could begin to work on getting those chassis rails in, knowing what width we were working to. Obviously the Type R engine is quite wide, like the V6 is, and the AllegRo is quite narrow because it's a 70s car. Cars have got a lot wider over the last few years, or last few decades. So yeah, got those chassis rails in, and then that's really the first step. We've got a lot of unfinished parts on the car still, but we're just trying to get ourselves to a point where we know that how everything's going to work, and then we can begin to finish things off and refine things as we kind of go further into the process. What I've got now is essentially the engine sat on the jig at the height it wants to be in relation to the wheel height at ride height, so that the drive shafts are level. Again, I've already kind of covered that, but I'll cover that in some more detail as well. And now what I'm trying to establish is more or less how to mount the engine and how to kind of build all of the suspension mounting points that are going to kind of all tie in together. So the AllegRo is obviously not a very structurally strong car. It doesn't even have that very thick steel in places where you'd think it would. So there's going to be quite a lot of steel to add in really, but the first area I'm concentrating on is getting these kind of chassis legs in, which are going to kind of bear the weight of the engine. So my plan is to have two chassis legs which are going to stick out straight from the bulkhead. We'll be able to reinforce those on both sides and kind of triangulate it all into what will be kind of the inner wheel arch and inner wing. So it'll look kind of as OEM as possible really. But they're going to be like 3mm, 100 by 50 box to try and start out with something that's super heavy duty that we can then tie everything off and tie everything into. And they'll stick straight out from the bulkhead. And then I plan to have like a bolt-on kind of crash bar like you would get on most modern cars now. It tends to be like a bolt-on bar which goes on the end of the chassis legs. And then I'm hoping that'll be the first mounting point for what will be the front panel and kind of flip front or removable front, basically. So I'm at a point where I've worked out roughly, you know, how high my chassis legs are going to sit, and I'm kind of just stacking it all up on bits of box section. Again, what's good about using like metric size box section and stuff like that is you can kind of just stack it up. You know, I'll go 1, 2, 300mm high, and then 2 10mm laser cut plates, so I know that's 320mm high from the jig bed, and I can level and start to work everything out off that. What I can also do is clamp everything down to the jig when I weld it. So what I'm going to do next is tack this chassis leg to the actual AllegRo bulkhead, and then start to make sure it's square, clamp it all down, and then when I fully weld it and begin to add in lots of reinforcing plates, I know that it's not going to move anywhere because it's all clamped down to the jig. Again, another real benefit of using a jig in this scenario. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to get the kind of chassis legs tacked in on both sides, start squaring them off each other, and then kind of thinking about engine mounts, I guess. There's loads to think about at this stage, but trying to make as many plans as I can so that we're not held up waiting for things. If we need to like, order an engine mount or some steel or whatever it is, laser cut parts, we don't end up kind of waiting for stuff. We can kind of be a bit ahead of the curve really. So yeah, I'm going to get the welder out and do some welding. so I've actually got the chassis legs welded in on both sides now. Not fully welded in, but I've added in some strength in the plates. One that's going like up the bulkhead, and then some that are going across. We'll have quite a lot more steel to add in this area, but I'm hoping to try and see how strong it all is once I kind of build up a bit of a general frame, and then I can start to triangulate and add in lots of gussets and things once I've kind of figured out that it's going to work the way I want it to work. Obviously we've got no wheels hubs or anything like that at the minute. I'm just working off of like where I think the hub's going to sit based on the track width and the wheelbase that we've got, but I can now start to think about adding in a brace that's going to go between these chassis legs at the front. So I'm kind of trying to build like what is quite a traditional chassis leg with a crash bar at the front. So I've got some laser cut plates that I'll use to enable it to be a bolt-on section, and I think what I'm most likely to do is build something that's going to be probably temporary for now, just to hold the chassis legs at the correct width, so that I don't have to worry about them splaying apart or splaying in as I'm doing more welding on them. So yeah, once I've got that in, kind of tacked in and temporary, I can then remove all these supports that I've got in for the chassis legs and begin to think about actually getting the engine mounted, and then where those lower arm positions are going to be. Okay, so I've now got all this like tacked together with this temporary front crash bar on the front. The reason I say it's temporary is because the engine's probably going to have to come a bit further forward yet. It's more or less touching the bulkhead, but I don't know until I get the engine to a stage where I can hang it and then level it and then like square it, which is really hard to do when it's kind of sat on wood. So that's why I needed to get these chassis rails started and then kind of squared up. And then also what I've done is so that I can get rid of the big bits of box section that were underneath here, which the chassis rails were sat on, to kind of keep them flat on top of the jig, is I've now just put a simple piece of box section in, so the chassis rails are squared and tacked, actually welded to the jig. So obviously these will come out in the future once we've got a bit more structure kind of added in at the bulkhead. I'm just trying to get to a stage where I'm trying to advance it so that I can get the engine in, and then when I know exactly where the engine sits, it starts to define how much work we need to do on the front panel, because obviously all of the front is going to be removable. So yeah, next step now, really, now that the car is fixed to the body, like the car is fixed to the body, the car is fixed to the jig, and then the rear of the chassis rails is fixed to the car, front of the chassis rails fixed down to the jig bed, and we can add all that structure in after. We've now got a really solid base and platform now to actually hang this engine on. Because this is a fully built engine, when I had the V6 in here, it's just a block and heads, doesn't really weigh very much. But because this is, you know, super heavy, or 100 kilos plus, I need to make sure that these are super sturdy before I go trying to hang any like significant weight off it, because all of the measuring and squaring up that I've done can soon be undone by just, you know, bending it with the weight of an engine. So now that that's sorted, I can start to think about the engine mounts and what we're going to use. I don't think we're going to be able to use these Honda FN2 engine mounts. The problem, which is a problem I've already encountered, is like, obviously the AllegRo is a 70s kind of skinny car, and a Honda Civic Type R is a wide modern hot hatch. So the engine's wide, the gearbox is wide, the engine mounts are wide. So I'm trying to kind of narrow everything up. I mean, these chassis rails are really as wide as I can go before we've got to start thinking about like limited steering lock and things like that. And I may have to cut some out of these in the future. But again, you've got to start somewhere, and that's sometimes the problem with these kinds of things, is that you get too overwhelmed with like trying to make sure everything's perfect from the off, trying to make sure that everything's going to be right from day one. And sometimes, with all the foresight in the world, you can just miss that one detail that prevents you from being able to kind of follow through with the original plan. So sometimes it's best just to start and live with the consequences later on, even if that means cutting out some of the work you've already done. Because even if you're doing that, it's still forward steps really. So yeah, next bit is to kind of start looking at these engine mounts in detail, how I can, yeah, I'm more or less going to mount the engine in the gearbox in the same way as Honda have done. But yeah, I'm going to have to use probably some like Fabricating kit car engine mounts, which you can, they're just like an off-the-shelf universal part that they kind of sell that you can use for any engine basically. So probably use those, but instead of actually using them to begin with, what I'll do is I'll make like a steel mock-up which has no flex or give in it. Then that way, when I begin to actually, again, start to measure and hang the engine, I've not got to worry about like rubber engine mounts providing any flex in where I mount them. So yeah, that's like next thing really, is to make up these kind of dummy engine mounts and then yeah, see where we can fit them. Okay, so while I'm waiting for a bit of material to start these engine mounts, I've got my cardboard out. We'll go into that in a bit more detail when I've got the material. I'm going to start looking at the lower arm pickup points. So this is the original pickup point from the jig. I've got my big washer welded on the end there to try and keep it as accurate as possible. What I've got here is, again, from the jig bed, got some spacer plates, which is just some laser cut bits of plate, and some kind of fairly accurately cut bits of box section. And the plan will be to run this piece of box section at the top here parallel out from the car, and then that'll be where the lower arm picks up from. I'll then also be able to triangulate it up onto that new chassis leg that I've put in. But what I need to focus on is getting it attached to the body. We've got these original kind of chassis leg pieces which extend out from underneath the car that I cut off on the inner wing. What I'm going to do is actually just put a piece of like a piece of steel straight on the edge of the original chassis leg, kind of like this, something like that. That'll get welded onto here and then onto the actual bulkhead as well, and I'll be able to like triangulate as much of that as possible. And then that piece of box section will weld straight onto the end of that, and it'll be able to get triangulated up and back to the bulkhead, and that should be pretty strong then. So yeah, first step is going to be getting all this cleaned up, getting the rest of this plate chopped off that I had to chop off for that chassis leg, get all that chopped off, and then get it tacked and welded on. Yeah, and then start thinking about exactly what height, how many bits of spacer and stuff I need in there to get those pickup points. I was going to change the height of the pickup point, but since I've got the hub assembled and got the knuckle on here quite nicely now, I can actually see that angle is going to be okay. So yeah, I'm going to roll with it at that. Sometimes it's you can try and over perfect it, and the reality is we just don't know until we make some more significant progress, and these are all things that can be changed. Yeah, anything can be changed, nothing has to be kind of final, as it were. So yeah, I'm gonna go for that for now, and we'll see how it works out when we get when I can actually try and articulate the suspension basically. So yeah, let's get some cleaning up done. So now I've got that plate welded in, I can start thinking about what kind of height I want this at. Now, the most ideal would be to have it completely like level with this, but it's not going to matter too much, and I kind of want to keep it a bit lower because I think we're going to have to drop the steering rack, and I don't want to like get into clearance issues straight away with something else. The steering rack's going to have to become lower. Because I don't think the Ackerman angle is going to be right, which is something we'll cover probably in the next episode. And I don't think, well, it's also going to have to come down because basically it hits on the gearbox. Which it would have also done with the V6 for anyone questioning the K20 swap. Yeah, it would have also done that with the V6. So I think I'm going to like drop it down a little bit. Probably something around halfway around here. I think that'll be fine. Yeah, then I'm just going to get it tacked onto this plate and start thinking about how I can add a kind of gusset in which goes between the main chassis rail and this new bar I've put in. And then I'll actually probably find that everything's starting to get quite stiff, because as soon as you start to triangulate and add lots of kind of weight of steel into the bulkhead and things like that, yeah, it starts to kind of add quite a bit of strength in. There's still tons more we're going to put in yet. This is going to be like a tank, a lightweight tank, this car, but yeah, I want it to be super stiff, super strong, because we want to make a real fast hot hatch. So yeah, get this all leveled up and yeah, get it clamped down, get some tacks on. So I've got that bar welded in now. At the minute I've got it on this temporary stacked up off the jig. Again, beauty of using the jig, everything's nice and square and flat, so you can just kind of prop everything up. So just whilst it cools down, I'll leave those bits of box and plate in. But yeah, now I can start thinking about adding some tabs to take the pickups for what will be the lower arm. So that's that next thing, but obviously I need to get to the same stage on the other side, and then start thinking about a brace which is going to go between the main chassis leg and then this new lower control arm mount. But it's getting there. It's still very early stages. In a few months I'm sure it'll look very different to this, but yeah, we're making progress. So I've also got this brace in here as well now. So we've got a good brace going from kind of the bottom lower control arm mount and then like the main chassis leg, and a diagonal brace down there. You know, we're starting to like triangulate things quite a lot, and then because this is where the actual lower arm is gonna mount, I've got that brace right in the middle, so it's gonna hopefully kind of you know, stiffen the whole front end of the car right up. I kind of envisage once we're a bit further down the line, there'll be a brace kind of underneath here which goes straight from one side to the other, like a bolt-on style, like strut brace or chassis brace, like an aftermarket style thing. So yeah, I think that'll work quite well. But yeah, we've got those lower control arm mounts in now and braced up to the chassis rails, which begins to add in quite a lot of triangulation and things like that, which, you know, just kind of increases the stiffness of all of this steel we're adding in. You want to try and add in as much triangulation as possible. But I'm now at a point where I'm starting to think about things like engine mounts. So yeah, it's going quite well really. The engine mounts will be a significant step, because once the engine is self-supporting, we can get rid of the wood and we can start getting things a bit more kind of laser accurate. Wood isn't necessarily the most accurate thing, but it's just what works for the minute. Yeah, once we've got those engine mounts fabricated, we can kind of get a bit more precision with the height and the kind of engine position on those chassis rails, because it'll be a bit easier to kind of maneuver it about. And then really we're starting to look at like the top mount positions of the struts, and starting to build some suspension up, and then the car's kind of progressing quite quickly from that point. We won't really need the jig much anymore at the front from that point, and we'll be maybe thinking about the rear suspension and what we're going to do with that. So yeah, I hope this has been interesting to watch. Any kind of questions you've got on some of the work we're doing, or if there's anything else you want to know, please just pop it in the comments. So thanks for watching.